right, so are you ready to dive into a story? That's, well, it's packed with more twists and turns than a boardwalk roller coaster. We're going to be looking at the life of Hakim Abdul Shahid, a figure who embodies this fascinating mix of contradictions.
Yeah, when I first looked at the Wikipedia article on him, I was just struck by the sheer range of his experiences. It's hard to reconcile the image of him as a devout young man
Yeah.
with, the notorious drug kingpin that he later became, and then his turn towards helping others.
It really does. It makes you wonder what forces kind of shaped his trajectory. He was born Robert Edward Molly in 1959 in Atlantic City, New Jersey, to a large religious family. His father was a Pentecostal pastor, so faith was a central part of his upbringing.
Almost like the classic setup for a redemption
Mhm.
story, right?
Yeah.
But then you learn that he earned the nickname Midget Molly because of his height,
No.
5'2", and you start to see how maybe he was already wrestling with perceptions
Mhm.
and trying to assert himself.
Yeah.
So
And then there's the tragedy of losing his father at a young age. It's hard to imagine the impact that had on the family dynamics and on Robert himself.
yeah, loss can be a real catalyst for change,
Yeah.
pushing people in different directions. In his case, he found himself drawn to the Nation of Islam, which was a powerful movement advocating for Black empowerment during a time of significant social change.
And that's when Robert Molly becomes Hakim Ali Abdul Shahid. It's a powerful statement, embracing a new identity and aligning himself with a group that was really challenging the status quo at the time.
Yeah, this name change isn't just about shedding a label, right? It's about actively choosing a new path, a new ideology. But this is where the story takes a sharp turn. And frankly, it surprised me.
Yeah, in 1980, at just 21 years old, Abdul Shahid is convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 6 years in prison. It seems like a complete departure from the path he'd been on.
It makes you question, was this a sign of a darker side that was always there? Or was there something else that triggered this drastic shift? Was there an incident, a specific event, that pushed him towards this act of violence?
Yeah, the details around that conviction are still a bit murky, but
Yes.
what we do know is that when he got out of prison, he dove headfirst into the criminal underworld.
And he wasn't just a small-time player, right? He quickly rose to prominence, becoming a major drug trafficker. With connections to the Medellin cartel, we're talking 600 kilos of cocaine per shipment moving across multiple states. This was a serious enterprise.
And he wasn't afraid to show off his success either. There's this almost legendary story of him walking into the Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino Ballroom wearing a $1.5 million gold crown, surrounded by his entourage.
Yeah, that image is so striking. It speaks to his ambition, his desire for recognition, but also perhaps a sense of invincibility, a belief that he was untouchable. Do you think that crown was a symbol of power or a sign of something else, maybe insecurity?
It's a good question. Maybe it was a bit of both. But what's clear is that he was building a reputation, an image, and that kind of notoriety attracts attention, not all of it good.
Exactly. That leads us to 1989, when Abdul Shahid's reign comes crashing down. After a 7-month investigation, he's arrested along with 20 of his distributors.
The authorities suspected him of being involved in multiple murders, though he was never convicted for those. But his days as a kingpin were over.
And that infamous gold crown never recovered. It's almost symbolic, don't you think? Like a tangible representation of his vanished power.
It definitely adds to the mystique of his story. In 1990, he's convicted as a drug kingpin and sentenced to over 19 years in federal prison. But here's the thing, this isn't the end of his story.
It's actually the beginning of a whole new chapter, one that focuses on redemption. And that's what I find particularly intriguing about this case.
So we've got this complex figure here, shaped by a religious upbringing, drawn to a movement focused on Black empowerment, yet making these choices that led him deep into the criminal world. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it really highlights the idea that people are a product of their environment as much as their own choices. And when you look at Abdul Shahid's environment, you can't ignore the backdrop of Atlantic City.
Oh yeah, it's a city that has always had this kind of duality to it. On one hand, you've got the glitz and glamour of the casinos, the promise of wealth and excitement. But on the other hand, there's a long history of poverty, crime, and a system that doesn't always offer equal opportunities.
Right, it creates this kind of pressure cooker atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
especially for a young Black man in the 70s and 80s, surrounded by the allure of easy money, but the legitimate paths to achieving that success can feel blocked. It's not an excuse for his actions, but it helps us understand the context.
And then there's the role of the Nation of Islam in his life. At first glance, it seems like a positive influence, steering him towards self-reliance and community. But was there a darker side to that ideology, too?
That's a really important question. The Nation of Islam during that era was complex. They were advocating for black empowerment, but some of their teachings, particularly around self-defense and the idea of a separate black nation, could be interpreted in a way that justified violence.
So it's possible that while the Nation of Islam gave him a sense of purpose and belonging, it also might have contributed to a worldview where violence was seen as a legitimate means to an end.
It's certainly something worth considering. And when you look at the scale of his drug operation, it's clear that he was a highly intelligent and organized individual. He wasn't just reacting to circumstances, he strategizing, building a network,
Oh.
exploiting vulnerabilities in the system.
That brings us back to the Gold Crown incident. What do you make of that? Was it a pure power play, a way to intimidate rivals and assert his dominance?
There's definitely an element of that. It's a deliberate flaunting of wealth and a message that he's not afraid of anyone. But I wonder if there's also a psychological component at play here.
What do you mean?
Well, remember his nickname, Midget Molly.
Hmm.
You know, he's been underestimated his whole life. Maybe the crown, the flamboyance, was a way of overcompensating, of demanding the respect he felt he was denied.
It's like he's saying, look at me now, you can't ignore me.
Exactly. But of course, that kind of attention comes with a price. His high-profile lifestyle made him a target for law enforcement. And that 7-month investigation that led to his arrest, that wasn't a coincidence. They were watching him, waiting for him to slip up.
It's a classic case of hubris, isn't it? He got so caught up in his own image, his own power, that he lost sight of the bigger picture.
And it cost him everything. He lost his freedom, his empire, even that symbolic gold crown. It's a stark reminder that no matter how high you rise, the fall can be swift and brutal.
But even in prison, something shifted for Abdul Shahid. It's like he went through another transformation, one that ultimately led him towards a path of redemption.
This is where the story gets really fascinating, because it challenges our assumptions about what redemption really means. Can someone who has committed such serious crimes truly change? And what does that change look like?
Those are questions that a lot of people grapple with, especially when it comes to the criminal justice system. We tend to label people based on their worst actions, but what about their potential for growth and rehabilitation?
Right, and in Abdul Shahid's case, we see him coming out of prison with a completely different mindset. He dedicates himself to helping young people avoid the mistakes he made. He becomes an advocate, particularly for incarcerated Muslims, and he even founds the D-Bear Youth Foundation to address issues like gang violence, drug use, and teen pregnancy.
It's almost like he's trying to make amends for the harm he caused, not just through words, but through action.
Yeah, and it raises so many questions about the nature of redemption. Is it about atoning for the past, about preventing others from making the same mistakes, or is it something more internal, like a shift in perspective and values?
And how do we as a society measure that change? Do we look at actions? Do we consider motives? It's
Yeah.
a complex issue with no easy answers.
Especially when you consider the public fascination with his story. 2 books have been written about Abdul Shahid, and there's a clear interest in his life, both the highs and the lows. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's the inherent drama of it all, right? You've got this almost Shakespearean rise and fall, the religious upbringing juxtaposed with the criminal empire, the $1 million crown and the prison bars, and then this quest for redemption.
Yeah, it's like a modern morality play. It forces us to confront our own beliefs about good and evil, about second chances, and about the possibility of transformation.
And it speaks to something universal, this idea that everyone has a story, that even those who make terrible choices can still find a path towards something better.
Yeah, it reminds us to look beyond the labels we assign to people, to see the complexity of the human experience. And that's a powerful message, especially in a world where it's so easy to reduce individuals to headlines and sound bites.
So what do you think is the most important takeaway for our listeners from this deep dive into the life of Hakeem Abdul Shahid?
I think it's a reminder that we should always strive to understand the context of someone's actions. You know, it's not about excusing criminal behavior, but about recognizing that there are often these complex social, economic, and personal factors at play.
And it's a challenge to examine our own biases, too. Are we more willing to accept the idea of redemption for certain types of people than others? Do we truly believe in second chances? Or are we quick to judge and condemn?
Those are questions worth pondering.
Right.
And ultimately, I think Abdul Shahid's story encourages us to engage in these difficult conversations, to challenge our assumptions, and to consider the possibility that people can change, even in those unexpected ways.
It's been a fascinating journey exploring the life of a figure who defies easy categorization from devout beginnings to notorious criminal to advocate. Hakim Abdul-Shahid's story leaves us with more questions than answers. But that's the beauty of a deep dive, isn't it? It sparks curiosity and encourages us to keep exploring.
Absolutely. The world is full of these compelling narratives, just waiting to be uncovered and examined. So let this be a reminder to keep asking questions, to keep digging deeper, and to always be open to the unexpected turns that life and stories can take.